The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
If my actions have split off from who I know God to be and who I know myself to be, then I'm not going to recognize myself, or I'm not going to recognize God. And when we don't recognize ourselves, we can't write. You know, the writing can be the process of coming to remember, though. Like, it wasn't like I was doing the remembering and the recognizing and then I would write it out. But the practice that revealed the memory.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Writers Amber and Seth Haines are married to one another. They've each written and published books of their own, but now they've written a book together. That book is The Deep Down Things, Practices for Growing Hope in Times of Despair. I was delighted to sit down and talk with them about Gerard Manley Hopkins, writing in partnership, marriage, and recognition, among other things. Amber Haines, Seth Haines, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast to talk about your new book, The Deep Down Things, Practices for Growing Hope in Times of Despair. I love that phrase, the deep down things. Tell me about why you named this book, The Deep Down Things.
Well, so I know that you know the Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, God's Grandeur. Of all the people, of all of the podcasts we've been on, Jonathan, I know you know this poem, which makes me delighted.
I love that poem.
We were really early on sort of trying to think through how we wanted to tell the story that we told and what were the things that we wanted to kind of say, and particularly as it relates to despair, what are the things that we can sort of hold on to in those despairing moments to find hope. For Amber, it was to find hope. For me, it was to hold out hope for her. And we just kept coming back to this idea of the sacramental things, right? When like everything around you feels like it's burning down, what are the areas where God's given us like very particular grace? And by engaging in that grace, we can continue to hold on hope. And I got COVID actually, and I was reading this book called The Gospel According to Gerard Manley Hopkins. And so I went on this like deep Hopkins kick. And Amber is a huge Hopkins fan. I'm a huge Hopkins fan. And as I was reading this book, the author just was talking about that poem, God's Grandeur, and the deep down things, and how Hopkins like sort of saw everything in the world is imbued with the deep down goodness and grace of God that kind of holds all things together. Mm-hmm. And the minute I just sort of read her interpretation of that poem, I just thought like that's it. That's the thing. That's it. And so Amber and I talked about it, and of course, Amber didn't bat an eyelash. She said, "Yeah, that's the title, 100%." And so we moved forward that way, and just kind of oriented the essays in the book around that idea.
Yeah. So this book is a collection of essays, half by Amber, half by Seth. And well, maybe I should have started by asking you, just when people say, "What's this book about?" What do you say? How do you answer that question?
I always say it's about despair, and Seth says it's about hope. So we've said that to many people, and it is. It's about both. And if you're a human, then you've experienced despair, or you will.
Yeah.
Not to discourage anyone, but it's coming.
Yeah.
And so how do we navigate that, particularly when hope is not a thing that we feel? Like, how can you trust that it's really, I mean, we don't say this in the book. We don't outright say hope is a person. Hope is the Holy Trinity. We don't outright say that. Mm-hmm. But how do you participate with hope?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe it'll come about as a feeling.
Yeah.
So
why don't you say in the book that hope is a person?
I don't know why we didn't do that. I think that we show it. We don't tell it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but I mean that's the truth of it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I hear you. I agree that you show it. So thank you for showing it, by the way. Okay, so draw this connection for me between the deep down things and despair and hope.
The deep down things, truly, the way I'm looking at it is, how can we acquire a set of sacramental lenses? How can we begin to see the world with sacramental eyes, mm-hmm. and see that everything is a window to a deeper thing? And Hopkins, he understood it. He wrote it into everything. Every single little dappled thing, the way the light landed anywhere, that was a window into God's grandeur.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to let despair win the day when you're all of a sudden like God's grandeur.
Yeah. Yeah. It's waiting to wink out.
That's right.
Yeah. Like this, was it Shining from Shook Foil? Is that the same poem with the Shining from Shook Foil?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right.
Jonathan, what's I know that I'm supposed to be promoting the deep down things, not the gospel according to Gerard Manley Hopkins, but I recommend everybody go buy that book. It's such a good book. And there's this story, and I do think it was in that book. There's a story that, and others have told this story before too, but that when Hopkins was younger, he took his brothers out into the forest, and he didn't just point at the flower and say, "Hey, there's the beauty of God in the land of the living. Like, there's something that God created that's very beautiful." Instead, he told them to take it and eat it, which I gotta think is part philosophical and theological, and part just a brother being a jerk, eat the flower. But he believed that nature was so imbued with God that even in those like darker moments of despair, if you really, really looked, if you had those sacramental eyes, if you looked, you could say, even still, God is here. Mm-hmm. And his life was a real testament to that. I think it's really easy to call him a master poet now, looking back on it. But he died not knowing that anybody gave a rip about his work. I mean, he died not knowing whether anybody would ever read him again. His first poems were completely overlooked. He was in a monastery. He tried to be a teacher. He wasn't a particularly good teacher. Students didn't really like him. And so he kind of had this life that was really full of despair. Like, I'm not good at anything. Nobody likes my stuff. And yet somehow he continued on with the belief that there was an ultimate hope. And so I think there's no better icon of hope than Hopkins.
Yeah. Yeah, you said his calling was to transpose the energy of God onto the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you said, that's the ultimate deep down thing for Hopkins. And then it's what you just said. He did this in spite of this serious ambivalence. People who, even his joining the Catholic priesthood was in opposition to his family, and I don't know how actively opposed they were, but they were Anglicans in any case. And as you said, nobody read his poems, and yet he pursued that calling anyway.
And just, not to play too much inside baseball here, but I think three writers on a podcast, how can we not talk a little bit about it? Being a writer is hard, and there's no guarantee that our work is going to survive us. There's no guarantee that there's no guarantee that anybody's going to read the book we just put out, or our next book, or your next book, or whatever. And so there has to be a deeper hope than the vocation of being a writer. There has to be a deeper hope that somehow something that somebody, that we put on a page, meets somebody where they are and provides them with a little hope. And again, man, like what a mentor in that craft that we have in Hopkins.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I were just saying before we started recording that the loneliest day for a writer is release day. When you put this thing in the world that has meant so much to you and realize the world's interested in other things. This world, the world that you made this thing for they're trying to get breakfast.
Yeah. You hope. When you write a book about really relating to people in their humanity as it regards despair, there's a part of you that's like, well, I hope you don't need this book.
Well, that's a good point.
Like, yeah. I'm not like, oh, I hope you're in a bad place. I need to read this. Yeah. It's hard to know what to say. And it's also in the midst of, Israel and Gaza. So much can feel so silly. But as I read it, as I go back to it, and as we have conversations and podcasts, I know that we, in our own way, were a conduit, for art and for God. I hope.
Yeah. So I don't remember which one of you it is who writes about the idea of noticing all the places where God shows his love and then going to those places. And that being a way of acknowledging that even in a world where things are dark, there's light. And Amber, I'd love to hear, I love the way you talk about your garden, Amber, a place where God shows divine love to you. And you talk about the Gothic middle, which it took me a while in that chapter to understand even what you were talking about by the Gothic middle. But I love that phrasing. You said there's no way to count the deep down things in a garden, all the tiny lives and deaths and true beauties that connect us with God. I'd love to hear you talk about your garden and how that's a source of hope. I just last night, right before it got cold, I went out and got all my tomatoes and peppers and basil before the freezing temperatures came.
Yes. It was a mad rush for all green tomatoes and all the hidden peppers. And I had zucchini. I rescued zucchini.
Really?
Just yesterday.
Wow.
And in all that, I discovered mounds of sweet potatoes with sweet potatoes down in there as big as my noggin. And it is just, I think, that sense of discovery for me, and really live action kind of like everything is, you can forget about a garden, which I have done in this one. We were building a house and I just sort of, threw a bunch of stuff out there and said, I hope for the best, and walked off. And I mostly grew Johnson grass, which is a weed, a relentless weed. And, but in the middle of all this, you have to part the Johnson grass or clip it out. And then I have all these dahlias, and every single day, a whole new dahlia is popping up, and it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is sacred geometry perfection. And so I can cry at a dahlia. And so that's who you're talking to. And but I also love, I mean, what I mean by the Gothic middle is that as much as there is this life and this beauty, there is also just complete disaster, disease, and death, and the killing of little critters so that your plants can live. Yeah. And so seeing that a healthy garden is just as full of death as it is life. One can't exist without the other. Life literally cannot exist without death. And one of the things that I write in there that I think is funny is that that's the bad news for vegans.
Yeah.
Because there's not a piece of lettuce that has ever lived that a critter didn't have to die, didn't have to get off of it and die. Yeah. And so, for us who are not vegans, we eat meat, that is a death.
Yeah.
So that we can live. And so it is just endless metaphor. And so as someone who has a degree in poetry, that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Oh shoot, there was something you said in there that I thought was so funny, but now it's never mind. It's not gonna come back. Well, one thing you say, Amber, in the introduction, or the letter to the reader, you said most of the time spent writing creative nonfiction isn't in the writing at all. It's in living the story. And I love that insight. We think of writing as something that happens that starts between a person's ears and then moves out from there. And that's really not how good writing works.
No, it's not.
The floor is now open for, that wasn't a question, I realize, but.
I mean, that's just the truth. I don't know how to pull stuff out of my noggin out of nowhere. I've tried to write fiction. I'm not that girl. It's all in what I'm living. A lot of times the way my brain works, though, is that when I'm going about my living and in my conversations, I'm describing the scenario to myself constantly. So I write, I'm constantly describing every scene that I'm in, or a person's character. I'm like sitting there like listing off generosity, or the way the light hits their hair. I describe it. And so I think that's part of what I carry to the table with me when I'm finally at my desk and when I finally, settle down, which can take me forever. I actually way prefer the living of writing than the writing of writing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Do you, when you say you're framing these images and words, are you writing them down every day, or are you just sort of practicing in your head?
For the most part, when I was younger, I was writing them down every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 4 sons, and 3 of them I have 16, 17, and 19-year-old, and then a 12-year-old. So I'm not sitting down to describe things. No, very, very rarely. But the practice has picked back up. It's actually interesting that the writing the deep down things was a fulfillment of a contract that I signed, I think, in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
In a long time. So there's been a way that writing this book has been a thing that I had to do. And I never would have guessed that writing about despair and how to participate with hope to make it would be the topic of my book. I would never have chosen that out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But it was the life that we lived.
Yeah.
So that's what I had to write. But now that the book is out, I have found myself kind of released in a way to just start practicing a little bit more like Hopkins did, and to put, the power of God on the page.
Yeah. You got that monkey off your back.
I did.
Yeah. So are you telling me you were like happy when you signed the contract in 2014, and then in the intervening 9 years, you went through this valley and it changed everything that you thought you were going to write about whenever you
imagine
what can happen in 9 years, right?
That's right. That's right.
I want to talk about your writing in partnership. It's a husband and a wife writing a book. Not all husbands and wives could write books together. I mean, not just because not all husbands and wives are inclined to write books, but also there are other challenges.
There were challenges.
Would you be willing to talk about some of those challenges?
Yeah, there were certainly challenges because Amber's writing style is wrong and mine is right.
Okay.
And if you had asked her, she would say the opposite. I have the privilege to work a little bit in writing spaces with various authors and over the years, my own books, but also with others. I write a very, very particular way. And I'm a firm believer in pushing forward through the work with the rough drafts, pulling out as much, insanity and art as you can in the first draft, but then stepping back from an essay or stepping back from a chapter and saying like, okay, what is the raw material that I have here? Mm-hmm. And then going back through and figuring out, okay, where can I foreshadow the end? Where can I pull, particular artistic elements in? What needs to cut? What needs to stay? I've always written that way. I've written that way since I was a child, actually. Mm-hmm. Amber is quite a different writer. So she likes to put a paragraph down on a page and then hone the crap out of that paragraph until it really sings to her, and then move on to the next paragraph and the next paragraph and the next paragraph. And so even in the writing, there would be times when I would give her a rough, because she's throughout the book, it's kind of a call and response. So I write the first chapter and then she's responding. And then she would come back as she was writing forward and say, are you really going to, blah, blah. I'm like, no, this is a draft, like respond to the draft. And then we can go back and sort of craft it. And there were times when it definitely caused some despair.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a hard time moving forward if I don't know that the foundation that I'm writing on, if I don't know what it is, because I'm referencing back to something that's solid. Mm-hmm. And so for me to move forward after one of Seth's essays, because they do build on each other, they're their own essays, but and I would be like, how can you walk around with this essay like this?
Yeah. What if a bus hits you?
It would make me crazy. And then I would have a hard time knowing where I was going to go. And so it was just a lot of patience, and it was just revealing, because I did have to start writing more like Seth. And the truth is, I actually think the way that Seth's process is the right way. Anne Lamott tells us that's how we're supposed to do it. And so it's just not how I do it.
Listen, the only way you can do it is the way you can do it.
That's right.
Whatever keeps the trend moving.
That's right. And I'll say this too, like, I think in some ways Amber moderated and sort of came more to the way I write, and I moderated and went more to the way that she wrote. I think we kind of met in the middle, and, we probably didn't hit our rhythm until probably the fifth or sixth set of essays. And so the rhythm for us, it came really slowly. And then when we got it, it was a lot tighter, even the initial collaboration. And I will say, like, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Amber, but we never really experienced like moments of real tension. There were like, I wish you would have done it this way, or maybe you should do this, or have you thought about this? But there was never any real tension. And I've written with a lot of people, and Amber's by far, hands down, my favorite person to write with.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yes.
One thing you wrote about Amber was the fact that when you started, or I guess before you started this process, you lost your voice, right? You had gone through some really dark things and didn't feel like you could do this. And you said you had to relearn how to write and also relearn how to read. And by the way, I feel like every time I start a new project, I'm having to relearn how to write. Mm-hmm. But you kept saying, I can't, and Seth kept saying, I know you can. And then you slowly began to believe him. And I love that idea of two writers. In this case, two writers have to be married to one another. One giving the other a little little courage to go on.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to, in one sense, yes, writing is a solitary endeavor. You have to go in the cave and do the work. Mm-hmm. But there needs to be somebody outside the cave too, telling you that they're pulling for you and they believe in you. So I loved reading about how your collaboration. Of course, there are unexpected difficulties, but I love that. That's I don't know if it was a surprise or not, but it's beautiful to think about. Yeah. These two people, one saying I can't, the other saying you can.
Yes. I lost my voice. I didn't even know how I sounded in writing anymore. And actually, when I did write, it was very, very straightforward and what I would have called not poetic. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's just getting older too. Mm-hmm. I think it's a combination of things, but I didn't know how I sounded. And I've always known my writing voice. Mm-hmm. And there was also an element of my story where I had used my voice to ask for help in a very, very hard situation. Mm-hmm. And my voice didn't matter. What I was saying over and over again and asking for help with was dismissed. And so my voice didn't bring about the good that I needed, the help that I needed. Mm-hmm. And so there was a sense of my voice doesn't matter. Even if I can get something on the page, it doesn't matter. And so I think because Seth, we've been married for 24 years and a couple of days. And because I trust him and because he did hear my voice, I don't think he ever lost sight of my voice. He just knew with his whole self that I could do it. I mean, he really did. I don't think he doubted it. And so, and I even until I had written most of the book, kept saying, I can't finish this. I can't do this. It was very hard.
Oh, okay. So this wasn't just before you started and now you got what you needed and you're ready to go. This is all the way through.
No, it was very hard. And by the time we got to the end, I was like, oh, this is a good book. And I'm so glad we did this. But I can now hold this thing in my hand and say, he believed when I didn't. And this is as close as we'll ever come to writing a marriage book. It's not a marriage book, but it's a good picture of a marriage, I think. And we've known so many people who one partner is in the depths. And the other person is left like, are they ever going to come back? Are they ever going to show back up to me? Or, what is happening? And there are some ways that I've just never, I'm never going to be the same as I was before. Mm-hmm. I'm something new now. And Seth loves that too. Mm-hmm. So it's been encouraging. And this book is a proof for me of, I don't know, I think of our love for each other. Actually, I hadn't said that out loud, but it's actually really cool that we got to do that together. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. I love that idea that you're not who you used to be, and Seth loves the new Amber too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk to young couples about this all the time, like the number of people that you're going to be in the course of a marriage. Mm-hmm. Like, listen, Amber married a Baptist youth minister who had no aspirations of being anything other than a minister, and maybe a songwriter, but that was it. And now she's married to a Catholic writing attorney. Like, you couldn't be any more different. And it took a lot of different iterations of me to get to where I am, including a really dark season where I struggled with alcohol. And it took a dark season with one of our kids in the health scares and issues. And it took Amber going from, being in this marvelous poetry program to dropping out to take care of children and being a stay-at-home mom, and so the number of people that you're going to be in, the way that you relate to each other over the course of a marriage just shifts and changes. And if you try to lock the other person into that image of who you married or who you want them to be, man, that's a recipe for unmet expectations and anger and resentment. And, you know, there's a real beauty to the changing of everything, really. You know, there's a real beauty to the sunrises, but it also sets, you know, and that's kind of, I think now that we're in our 40s, I think that's kind of how we feel about each other, you know, like we've changed a lot. We're going to change some more, and that's okay. Like, this is the ride we signed up for, and we're really excited about it. We want to find the beauty in it.
I mean, we say we're excited about it and we want to find the beauty in it. But I mean, with teenagers in the house, I just know they're about to slip out the door any minute and they're not coming back. That's how I feel. So I don't want to sound like I'm actually good at this. Because I want to strangle my life to death right now. I want to say, be still and stay like this for just a minute, please. Because I'm so grateful for where we are. Yeah.
Yeah. We're supposed to be talking about writing, y'all. This isn't
Are we?
marriage.
That's okay. That's writing too.
Yeah. Yes, it is. That's right. Yeah. No,
we're living the story, man.
That's right. You're most of the time spent writing creative nonfiction isn't in the writing at all. It's in living the story. That's what Amber said. So
yeah,
coming back to it. Okay. Before we run out of time, I know we're not super close, but I want to make sure we've talked about this idea of recognizing. You've already talked to Amber about you reached a point where you couldn't hear your own voice. You didn't trust your voice. Another way of saying that is you didn't recognize yourself. And there's a sizable part of this, you know, a chapter in this book or an essay about this idea of recognition. And the idea that knowledge in many ways is remembering, right? It's that word recognition contains both doing again and knowing. It's about knowing again. And I thought that was a really helpful way to think about a lot of things. Our work is people do creative work, right? That originality isn't just creativity isn't just a matter of doing something nobody's ever done before, but rather coming back to something that's been true before. I'd love to hear y'all talk about why you ended up talking about recognition for a few pages in this book.
So in that essay, I led with that essay, which was really awkward because I led with that essay and I talked a little bit about Amber's story, which I'll let her share her initial sort of faith story. But for years and years and years, as Amber's told that story, she's used the same word over and over again, which was recognize. And what it means to go from a lack of recognition to a recognition of who you are, of who God is, of the truth in the world around you, or the beauty in the world around you, whatever the thing is. And there's so much about, the writing life is that it's noticing, it's recognizing, it's seeing, it's observing. And so, I truly believe that every act of writing is an act of spiritual formation. I don't care who you are, what you're writing, what the medium is, who the audience is. Like, every act of writing is an act of spiritual formation. And that really sums up what it means to have really well-formed writing, and really a really well-formed soul too, is just saying, I'm going to stop, I'm going to recognize, I'm going to notice, and then I'm going to write that on the page in a way that that hopefully says something true and good and beautiful about who I am and who God is and how He's met us.
Yeah. My faith journey actually started I guess when I was born, but the day I came to faith was a day that I walked past a mirror and didn't recognize myself in the mirror. And so that was the day that I had an experience with Jesus. and slowly came to recognize myself as I came to know who God is and that God loves me. I think in this really hard season where things fell apart and really COVID kind of simultaneously hit. So a strange season for the whole world. It was in the air.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't doing what we're used to doing. The things that make us us,
Mm-hmm.
we aren't that anymore. So there's this like loss of identity. And also, the context like of the faith too is so many people are walking away because they don't recognize Jesus at church anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the whole, like our culture is detaching from a lot of things that we used to be attached to. But there's that verse in James, and this is what I kept thinking about, for if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man beholding his natural face in a mirror, for he beholdeth himself and goeth away and straightway forget what manner of man he was. And so I've been contemplating that. I still contemplate what does it mean to know myself and what does it mean to know God? And a whole lot of that has to do, I don't know, what am I trying to say? With are my actions and is my life, or is my doing aligning with what I believe?
Mm-hmm.
And if my actions have split off from who I know God to be and who I know myself to be, then I'm not going to recognize myself, or I'm not going to recognize God. And when we don't recognize ourselves, we can't write. The writing can be the process of coming to remember, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that a lot of times, well, for me at least, the writing, like it wasn't like I was doing the remembering and the recognizing, and then I would write it out.
Okay. Yeah.
But the practice that revealed the memory.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So y'all are sounds like you're saying two different things. So I'm gonna give you a chance to explain how you're not being self-contradictory. Okay. Y'all are talking about all these changes that you've been through in your life, right? From Baptist youth minister to Catholic lawyer writer, for instance. What's the connection between change and recognition? Because recognition is looking back, or is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't see any contradiction in it, because as I look back on my own journey, the question that I have over and over and over again is, who held me? Who had me? Who did I belong to? And various parts of my identity have changed. Various things have changed. Occupations have changed. The place I go to stand, sit, kneel, whatever has changed. But the fact that God has always been with me in the quiet spaces, and that he's always said, hey man, like, I love you and I've got you. And, we're in this together, and you can find me out in the world and the beautiful things, like, that has not changed.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think for me, there's a lot of the recognition of who God was in my early days. Early on, Jonathan, I said this the other day, and I felt really weird about saying it, but it's kind of true. When I was growing up, my biblical formation was in the Baptist church, and I love that. I don't hold anything but love for that. Learned the scriptures there, came to love the scriptures there. But I went to Catholic school. This is fourth grade. And in the quietness of the sanctuary, in the movements of the Mass, in the raising of the host, in the sacramentality, like, I actually felt what the scriptures describe, right? Those are two different things. Mm-hmm. But when you're in fifth grade, sixth grade, early 20s, you kind of see those things and you look back on them and you're like, yeah, but man, I'm not supposed to be that. I'm supposed to be this Baptist kid or this evangelical kid, or I'm supposed to be this, lawyer or economist or doctor or whatever. I'm supposed to be these things. but when you look back on your life and you say, at the essence, who was I? Like, where did I meet God? Where did I see God? Where did I experience him? And you really recognize that, then it's so much easier to shed all of these sort of categories that constrain you and say, no, like, I recognize who I am from my earliest days. I recognize where God met me. I recognize what he wants to do in my life. And I'm going to go to those places to find him. So for me, I don't know that those are contradictory. Parts of us change, but that like deep core part that we need to recognize in order to have communion with God, I don't think that ever changes. I hope that never changes. It hasn't changed in my life.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. I like the question, what remains?
Yeah.
You know, there a lot of things can burn down around us multiple times through our lives. But there's that, you know, I don't almost feel cliche talking about like our inner child or whatever, but that little Amber that first loved to try to write some poems, you know, as a kiddo, and that noticed nature and obsessed over rocks. That's what remains.
Yeah.
And
that's what you recognize. That's the self you recognize.
And that is when I the most recognize God.
Mm-hmm.
It remains.
Yeah.
Everything else fades away.
Yeah. There are so many accidentals that we think are our identity, and then you realize, oh, turns out that's not my identity.
Mm-hmm.
My identity is something else, and I don't need to invest too much in these accidentals, which you know, as y'all change, maybe you're moving toward a self that you do remember.
Mm-hmm.
Sure hope.
Yeah,
I think that's true, and I think some of those accidentals, man, like to me, some of those accidentals are true accidentals. Like I was born in the Baptist church. I didn't choose the Baptist church. I was born there.
Yeah.
But some of those accidentals are also still not your identity, but they're part of who you are. They're like your talents, your gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Like you weren't placed as a writer, right? Like no, your parents didn't raise you and say, okay, now you're a writer.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just like in you. That was who you were, and that isn't accidental. It's not the whole of your identity, but it's a gift and it's a talent. It's something that you use, and you use it really well. And so I think that there is a lot of value in looking back and saying, what are the things that are truly like burn downable, to use Amber's phrase? What are the parts that God gave me that are who I am and how I experience him? And then where are the places that I'm most in tune with God, and the things that hopefully aren't ever going to change. And how do you recognize the distinction between those things and live into those things?
Yeah. And that's also, as you identify those things, that gives you an idea of what you have to give to the world as a person who does creative work or any other kind of work for that matter. Right. That's how you can tell a truer story than the one you're hearing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's I've been talking lately with he's creative, but his creativity is actually bent towards understanding coding, algorithms, all kinds of really nerdy stuff that I suck at. And I look at him and I'm like, man, this is actually part of who you are, and it's a beautiful gift to the world to use that creatively. You didn't choose that. You weren't born into this. Like it's part of your artistic gifting to understand this and to use this in ways that bless people. And that's every bit as artistic as anything, Amber or I or you will ever do,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love it. Okay. We're about to run into our time limit here. So I got to ask y'all, I want to hear the answer to your question. You can't say Gerard Manley Hopkins. No, actually you can. Who are the writers who make you want to write? You feel free to talk about Gerard Manley Hopkins, but you have to talk about some other people too.
Does everybody say Annie Dillard?
No. Some people don't.
Some people don't, but most do.
No, I would say that. No, Annie Dillard is a perfectly legitimate answer. But you have to help listeners understand. I mean, that's a lot of detail, right? Annie Dillard, that's a lot to slog through.
Yes, and people may think the same thing about my writing. I mean, I can only hope Yeah, I will never get some of her images out of my head. I can smell her writing.
Name an image that you can't get out of your head from Annie Dillard.
Bloody cat paws on a bed top.
Muddy cat paw?
Bloody. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a sweet little kitty cat who came in after having a little lunch. Yeah. And the image of a moth to a flame.
Yeah. Wow. That one's. Well, after hearing the way you talk about your garden, I understand why you like these images.
That's right.
A moth burning itself to death and
Gothic.
a cat that's red in tooth and claw.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
yeah, I think, man, this is like asking which is your favorite kid. Who's your favorite kid? Man, I love so many people. I think who makes me want to be a writer? That's the question, right?
That's the question.
Makes me want to be a writer. So I don't know how much David Mitchell you've read. I have 3 answers to this. David Mitchell is a novelist. He's a Brit. His characters are so real, but he also has this like really surreal, almost like sci-fi type of theme that sort of runs through all his novels. And he's created this what people have dubbed what he's created the Mitchellverse. So all his characters kind of pop up in different places, and he is the kind of writer that puts so much weight in character that I just like, I don't know that I could ever do that. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch. And it's not, the language isn't necessarily really beautiful, but Anthony, how could you not read Anthony Doran and not want to be a writer? All the Light We Cannot See was an amazing book, but his last book, Cloud Cuckoo, made me cry in places. It's like his ode to books. And then I think on the poetry front in particular, but also as a memoirist, like how can you not love Mary Carr? The images in her poetry are amazing. And to think that you could take, images like the image in Viper Rum, her poem, and then like run them by, through a 300-page memoir is just, it's insane. Her ability with language. Those are all modern writers. I guess I could go back and get some classics, but those are the people today that, like, if they release something, I'm going to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Y'all are Arkansans. Do you read Charles Portis?
No. But
Okay.
I know those two.
All right, friends. This has been so fun. Thank you. I love your book. I hope a lot of people read it.
Thank you.
And keep writing.
Thank you. We will.
Hey, you too.
Things in the world. Okay. Sounds good. Let's do it. Let's all write some more.
Let's agree right here. Can we have I'll draft up a contract. I'll send it to you. We'll all sign it.
No, I'm done with contracts until I actually have the manuscript written.
Okay. That's smart. Hey, you know what? That's the best piece of advice I've heard on any podcast is don't sign the contract until you've written the manuscript. That's so good. That's the goal of this entire podcast.
Yep. Glad to help. All right. See y'all later.
Thanks,
Bye.
man.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.